Hi, welcome to the Orbit Admissions series. I'm Dan, your host. I'm here with Dewey Wilmot, our Chief Academic Officer and the 25 plus year admissions expert. Here at Orbit AI, we provide an AI powered college admissions platform built to make expensive admissions guidance affordable for every family. Today we start at the very beginning. How to build a smart college list. So Dewey, how you doing? How you feeling?
Great, Dan. Happy to be here. Just excited about this series and sharing my wisdom with the masses.
I
Thanks
appreciate it.
thanks for hosting.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I love sitting down with you at any time I can. And yeah, appreciate you taking the time. I know the viewers out there want us to jump right into things. So let's jump right into things. All right. First question.
Good. Yeah.
Every family, every family starts here. Same place. So when the student sits down to build a college list, where should they actually begin? Where should they actually begin before names and rankings and all that mishigas?
Yeah, great question, Dan, because this really is the $1,000,000 question. Like, where you're doing this, but where should you start? And the simple answer to that is you should start within. In other words, you should be asking yourself, what are the important priorities for you with your college process? In other words, beyond just a set of rankings or like a list of name brand schools, like what really matters to you, not just academically, but personally, socially, extracurricular wise, like really try to think broadly about what your needs are. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can make notes, you can do questionnaires. I know our Orbit platform has a very robust list matching functionality with all sorts of factors. So the key here is to think widely and broadly and realize too that this will be a process.
Absolutely. 100%. Great. Great to hear that. I guess, like, obviously, with your years of experience, you've guided a lot of students through this. From being in that counselor's chair, what does a strong, well built list actually look like?
Yeah, another great question. So a good list reflects this heavy lifting that you have to do with your self-reflection, meaning you've thought through your set of priorities, a list of must-haves, wanna-haves, don't wanna have. And you've put together a probably, quite honestly, too long of a list of schools, but then you've researched this list and you've looked at how these schools match up to your must haves, want to haves, and don't want to have. And you've decided some are great fits, some are maybes, some are nots. And then you start dropping the knots, further researching the maybes, and eventually getting down to an ideal number of schools would be 8 to 12 schools.
Gotcha. Fit gets thrown around so much. I feel like it kind of gets used as a buzzword. But when you break it down, academic, social, financial, geographic, etc.,
Mhm.
which dimensions do you think actually matter the most?
Yeah, another just series of great questions here, Dan. Fit to me is about the idea of thrive. Where are you going to thrive? Right? So when we talk about all these multiple factors that go into building your list, the idea of fit is that these schools are going to meet these factors that you've set up, these gotta haves, wanna have, don't want. Okay. And fit really is the idea that these schools are going to be places where A, they're going to kind of rise to the occasion to give you the challenge and the opportunities that you're seeking. B, they're going to be nurturing, supportive environments where you're going to be able to find yourself and grow. And they're going to be places ultimately where you're going to feel kind of inspired to be. Okay. So fit really is about kind of doing the work to investigate schools to find this group of schools where you really feel like in your heart that you're going to kind of get the vibe there, so to speak. Like my son, who's in college now, talks about like the vibe on a campus, and it's really this idea of kind of nurturing the whole you. So to me, fit is about, it takes time though to do this research.
Absolutely hear what your son is saying about vibes. I did not really visit very many schools when I was going through this whole process. Wound up going to University of Georgia. Thank goodness, like an unbelievable vibe. It worked out well. But at first, you always have to acclimate. And I wish I had kind of thought more about fits before I'd actually pulled the trigger on going to UGA. But moving on, reach, match, safety. Those are the three kind of parameters we used. How should a student really kind of balance those three? And like, how would you separate those in those three columns? Like, what would you recommend? I guess you could put in a percentage of their list depending on how many schools they have. How would you break that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple ways to look at this, Stan. And there's different terminology that you'll hear for reach, target, safety, likelies, dream schools, stretches for the reach category. So however we call it, it's still the idea of a reach being a school that we know is going to be pretty hard to get into. We could say maybe like 25% less or less chance of getting in. Targets, I like to call like 50-50 schools, although ones where we would, maybe slightly expect to get in more than not. And then a likely or a safety school is one we feel pretty darn confident, like 90% plus chance that I'm going to be admitted there, right? And there's schools with sort of automatic admission criteria where if your GPA is a certain level and or a test score is at a certain level, you're guaranteed admission. And those are a true safety school, right? So in terms of how you kind of fill these buckets, there's two ways of doing it. There's a more conservative approach, which I'll call a football model. So a football, if you know the shape of a football, is narrow at the ends, wide in the middle. So in a football model, your ends would be the likelies and the reach schools. So you'd have fewer of them with a larger amount of target schools in the middle. And then the other model, which is a more aggressive, riskier model, I'll call the cone model, where you start broadly at the bottom and work way to a narrower tip. The tip would be the safety schools. In reality, you don't need a ton of safety schools because by definition, you're probably getting in. So again, getting back to building your list, if you've been smart about doing that, then you've identified the couple of safety schools that you would most want to go to. So rather than having 10 safety schools, like you do the thinking beforehand to narrow that down. So you have a few of those, maybe a few more target schools. And then if you want to be risky and have a bigger group of reach or dream schools, awesome. Because the only way you can get into a school that's hard to get into is applying. Right. So it doesn't necessarily hurt to have a bigger set of reach schools per se, as long as you know that, each one of them is tough. And there's a myth out there that applying to, 10 schools with a 10% chance of admission each means 100% you'll get into one of them. No, unfortunately, this is not an additive statistical game. You're going to still have a 10% chance to get into any of them. So, yeah, but this is kind of a part of that process. You have to make that decision of how kind of aggressive or cautious you want to be. Yeah, good questions. Yeah.
Hey, that's a great answer. This one actually is close to home for me, looking back at my experience. But how should the students factor in size and setting, like a big university versus small college, urban versus rural, when they may not actually know what they prefer yet?
Yeah, so this gets back to your very first question. How do you go about starting a list? So these are some of the factors to consider. And, coming from a high school setting where typically high schools are, maybe 3,000 on a big end to sometimes considerably smaller, the notion of a very large school, it's not a lived experience for most high school students. They hear about them, they know that these giant schools exist, but short of visiting them or knowing people that are attending that you can talk to, it's kind of hard. This becomes a hard question, and it kind of gets back to what I was talking about before about having your must-haves, want-to-haves, and don't want-to-have. So, if you're a student that's really kind of wanting the experience of having just many, many, many more options than you have in your high school, and you want to have multiple avenues of having that outside the classroom experience in terms of the extracurriculars that you're doing, how your social life is going. For example, like a lot of times the big schools are going to give you that opportunity, right? What the smaller schools, not that the smaller schools aren't going to do that's all still there too, right? Kind of a hallmark difference would be, in general, like smaller schools will tend to be more of a sense of a tight knit community just by default. Like it's a smaller group of people. You're more likely to know more of the community versus just being kind of a fish in a big pond, so to speak, at a big school. And if you want that type of nurturing, that type of more easy to access your professors type of situation, smaller schools can be great. I also want to bring up this idea of what we call the liberal arts colleges, which is a very misunderstood description of colleges because people hear the word liberal and they think liberal versus conservative. They hear the word arts and they think like it's an art school, right? What liberal arts means, the liberal part means just kind of broad based learning, kind of like a liberal application of ketchup to your plate of French fries. Like you dump ketchup all over the place, right? So liberal arts schools tend to encourage like broad-based learning, which is still very relevant in this day and age, as we kind of enter into this massive AI revolution. And the arts part is also kind of a misunderstanding because, believe it or not, there's engineering schools that are liberal arts schools. So really what I like to define this with my students is as the following: liberal arts colleges focus on the undergraduate experience. Okay, so folks listening to this podcast here are applying to undergraduate school. So these are the 4 years after your high school experience, as opposed to graduate school. And liberal arts colleges are really specialized in educating undergraduate students. There are oftentimes either no graduate programs or small ones. And these can be phenomenal places, right? But what they're going to be lacking in many cases is that big school experience because these tend to be smaller schools. So long-winded answer to that question, but again, it comes back to you looking at like what you want. And if you can, and even if you do this locally, everybody, if you go visit your local schools, like you probably have a small college nearby, you probably have a big college somewhere nearby, and going visiting them and just kind of seeing them in action is really helpful. So just like you wouldn't buy a car necessarily without test driving it first, you really want to try to visit colleges.
Yeah, that is a great answer. It's something I honestly, yeah, that I kind of think I was stuck in that thinking of liberal arts, like kind of, yeah, did the exact same association. It's really interesting to know that. I guess a quick aside in that, so that kind of classification, like obviously, I think it's already the best university undergrad in America, if not the planet. But does that, so Princeton essentially is like the gold standard, right? Because they don't really, do they have graduate programs?
Yeah, they do. I mean, when we look at a school like Princeton, which is obviously very well known and very highly ranked, amongst the eight Ivy League schools, Princeton, Dartmouth have smaller graduate student populations relative to the undergrad population, but it is in my opinion, one of the reasons why it gets so highly ranked because of the emphasis on the undergrad. And that this is this can be an issue, say for example, if you are kind of already planning on a graduate student experience. For example, if you're a pre-med student thinking about the healthcare industry, and in particular thinking about one of the doctoral medical, either MD or PhD, if you want to become a physical therapist, for example. And one of the key things you need on your portfolio to apply to medical school is ideally some research experience. And sometimes at the big universities with large graduate student populations, it can be harder to access these opportunities. Whereas at the smaller schools, these, again, by sort of definition, are generally more available, right? Now, that said, a lot of this comes down to you, the student, being proactive and, to be honest, somewhat aggressive about seeking out these opportunities. So just kind of in general in life, right? Like a lot of times you have to go seek the things that you're looking for versus having them dropped in your lap. Okay. Again, the small colleges though will tend to be more accessible in this way. So if you're someone who's pretty shy or not super aggressive about pursuing your interests, like those smaller schools can help bring this out in you. Or, alternatively, like maybe putting yourself out of your comfort zone into a bigger school, maybe that will be the kick you need to grow into that, right? Because college is not just about kind of who you are now, it's about who you're going to become, who you want to become. And to be honest, like getting out of your comfort zone a little bit, like the whole idea of applying to college is kind of slightly uncomfortable. So you're already going through this process, and you're making a smart move by putting in time to understand this. And the goal of our series is really to help you in that process as you think through these many factors involved in all of this.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's really, really well put. I guess like to harp on kind of what you said a little bit earlier in that answer, pertaining to like schools with more prominent post-grad programs. I guess like for students that are undecided or for students who are very much decided in terms of their major, how much should a student's or a school's strength in the student's intended major weigh in their decision making?
Huge, in my opinion. This is probably one of the most important things to look at. And the question sort of becomes like, okay, well, how do you investigate this? Right. So generally what I'm advising my students is you got to kind of do a dive into their academic pages on the website. You got to pull up department pages and not just like look at the kind of the sales pitch of the home page of a department, but really dig into it more by going to the people page. Like look at the professors. They all have bios there. Does the department at this school have 3 professors? Does it have 30? Right? Like how robust is it? What are the research areas that they're focusing on, right? What are the classes they teach? You can look at the set of courses. There's usually going to be some type of part of the academic pages that show you a progression of courses you take, whether it's on spelled out in the department pages directly or something called the catalog. The catalog is used to be like paper based, but these days obviously everything is digital. So a catalog is literally a somewhat dry listing of all the courses offered at a school, and you want to dig into that. And if the catalog doesn't have descriptions of the classes. Sometimes there's just like a course code, like Bio 373. click on it. You got to dig into it, right? To see like what that course actually is. So this requires effort. Some of our AI tools that we have out there, including on our site, Orbit, our Solvi counselor, you can query Solvi and have it do some of this heavy lifting for you and have it find these things and spell it out for you. So we can use our AI tools now, and this is a great use for AI. Obviously not writing essays, but doing research, fabulous. Like, tell me more about this professor, or tell me more about the courses at the school for my major. Like, to me is fundamentally important for fit, like the academic fit. Now, that said, many of you are undecided. You don't know exactly what you want to study. And guess what? That's 100% A-OK. Like, the hallmark of education in the US here is that it's okay to be undecided. It's okay to enter college with an exploratory mindset. So I like to, instead of using the word undecided, which implies like you're indecisive, right? Which I think is a negative connotation. I'd rather call that exploratory. Like, you have probably multiple interests. What are those interests? What part of the school's first 2 years are going to help you with exploration? A lot of schools, including the aforementioned liberal arts colleges, are excellent at helping you explore those first 2 years so that you can make a wise decision about what your major is going to be. Because, yeah, ultimately you have to decide on your major typically by the end of your second year. Right. But it's okay if you don't know what you want right now. But what you need to be thinking about in terms of academic fit is, what am I leaning towards? What are my passions? And bring it back to who you are now. Like, what have you enjoyed in high school? Like, what classes have you enjoyed the most? Right. And use this as a launching point for, what you think you may want to study. And last point I'll make on this, Dan, is that, a lot of students like change their ideas on this, right? Including throughout high school, including getting into college. Like, I'm a case in point. I changed my major 4 times at Princeton. And each time was because I was very exploratory. I had lots of interests and I was trying stuff out. And eventually I settled on a major that I'm really proud to have done. And, and it's okay. It was part of the process. So, and some students know what they want and they stick with it. Others change, and that's okay.
I totally agree with that. And yeah, I changed my major 3 times. So you got me beat a little bit. So like one thing that we get a lot from students is kind of this obsession with rankings. Like rankings can be really seductive, feed the ego a bit. Would you consider them in some way a trap? And if so, why? And like what are more important things to weigh
Yeah.
instead?
I mean, rankings are a trap if you put, everything into the ranking, right? What rankings to me, like, especially if we look at like the US based rankings, a lot of it has to do with either the lens that the ranking is using. So for instance, if we're doing like a return on investment type of ranking, like, okay, that's a pretty data driven type of ranking. If we're looking at like a US news type ranking, US news is almost entirely peer driven, meaning that a lot of it has to do with the perception of the colleges about themselves. Like, yes, there's data inputs into it as well, but a lot of it's like a sense of kind of what we look like to ourselves, right? So it's almost like kind of a beauty contest for the contestants are judging themselves, if you know what I mean. So and they kind of, it's sort of a self-perpetuating thing where once you're kind of highly ranked, you tend to stay up there. So there's a lot of like momentum with that. So to me, a ranking is it's just like one of many factors. I don't think you should ignore it if you feel like considering it. In fact, one of in orbit in our right fit matcher, you have the ability to kind of scale how important ranking is to you from either 0% all the way up to 100%. So we've built in like very nuanced way to look at kind of how your right fit match is created, um, with preference, admissions data, and then ranking data. So it's important to kind of know that it's okay to look at them, but much more important to me is more of that sense of like, is it going to fulfill the needs you have, like you need to have, want to have, don't want to have. Like you got to think more broadly than just rankings. So it's only a trap, Dan, if you put all your eggs in that basket, so to speak.
Totally get that. Only a few more questions as we continue. This has been great. I guess like because there is a very small sliver of the pie that does not have to consider this, but the vast majority of the pie does have to consider cost and financial fit. So like how should cost and financial fit factor in from the very start rather
Mhm.
than kind of an afterthought to figure out post admissions?
I'm so glad you asked that because I did not bring that up when we talked about this at the beginning. But that is crucial, and obviously, if you're in a rare situation of where, money is no object, like, great. But most of us, including those, more well off, money is still always an object. Like this is a big investment. I mean, college. There's an unfortunately growing list of colleges out there that are costing full ticket over $100,000 a year. So a couple things with cost is you want to look at not just tuition, which is usually the biggest cost of attending college, but rather what we call cost of attendance. So this includes all the other costs. So if you're living at the college, the room and board. If you're at home, like okay, that will be less. Or if you're living off campus, same thing. You have rent, you have, food to buy, right? Costs of attendance also includes all the fees, the recreational center fee, the health center fee. You have books, you have personal expenses. As I like to say, you're still going to go get a Starbucks. You're not always just going to eat in the dining hall. So the colleges, and this is what you need to do, kind of to answer your question, Dan. The colleges will all publish their kind of estimated cost of attendance. So you got to do a couple things. One, you have to have hard conversations as a family. Okay. You have to kind of from the beginning talk about like what is a reasonable budget. You have to sort of sit down and make some hard decisions. Like, can we afford 80,000 a year? Is our maximum 20,000 a year? Like, you got to make these decisions early because otherwise you're setting yourself up for disappointment later when you get into a school, maybe one of these like dream type of schools, and then you realize you see the cost, and because maybe you haven't qualified for need-based financial aid, suddenly something that was an absolute celebration turns into, to be honest, a bit of a nightmare in terms of how are we going to afford this. So it's better to have those conversations earlier. One way to kind of do this in a rational way is using something called a net price calculator. So net price calculators are online tools that the colleges publish where you can go in, and it's kind of like a pre-financial aid type of calculator where it's going to ask some probing questions about family finances and resources. So you're going to have to like share these details in the net price calculator. But what it'll spit out is an approximation of what type of aid, either merit-based aid. Merit-based aid is aid based on you being a great student and a great person and not based on your family financial situation. This is separate from need-based financial aid, which is based on your family's financial situation. So many colleges out there, including the more expensive ones, have generous merit scholarships that sometimes make the cost less than like a local public institution that at the face value may seem much cheaper. And these can be very big merit scholarships. I'm talking in the tens of thousands of dollars per year range. And these again are earned by you, the student, doing well in school, sometimes doing well on tests, but also being of good character, right? And these can be very significant. Like, I'm not joking when I say that, upwards of 150 to $200,000 for 4 years. That this is significant amount of money. So running a net price calculator, having tough conversations with whoever's going to be supporting you, whether it's parents, single parents, guardians, or sponsors. You know who I'm talking about. Like, you got to have these hard conversations early.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that is great advice. And you've experienced this actually a couple times recently with your kids, but I guess like broader and more aimed towards parents here. Like, where can they genuinely help, and where can they kind of get in the way,
Great,
kind of make things a little
great question,
trickier?
man. Yeah, and because my parents that I'm, of the students I'm working with are asking me this, and there's a couple answers to that. One is like, kind of like, do what you're doing to have like a healthy household. Like, make sure you're helping your student kind of eat well, get enough rest. Like, we're definitely in an era where it's kind of somewhat easy to get burned out with all the expectations on students these days, and it's different. Like, there's a lot expected right now, and it's real. So parents just helping kind of be parents is one thing, like helping just their children be healthy, right? And then in terms of the college process, this is hard, like actually stepping back to let your students fail in a way, like kind of hit some bumps, like resilience and the ability to kind of work through tough times is a really important value that colleges love to see. Like, they would much rather hear a student talking about what they learned from a setback or a failure than just being like the perfect student. Like, there's almost fatigue with this idea that I need to be perfect. So giving your children like the space to learn and grow from setbacks is really important. Supporting them, also like asking them what kind of help they need. Like, some of my students I'm working with really want the support of a parent, and it's sort of like being an executive assistant or something, just helping with some tasks, right? Others really are going to only thrive when parents are able to step out of the room, so to speak, and let them be in charge, right? So it really depends too on the relationship you, the student, have with your parent or parents or guardians, and vice versa. So it's, again, having those conversations about how you can support each other, and not being afraid of those conversations, right? So, and then the last thing is logistically, right? If you are in a position to plan some college visits, like, that's, parents are key for that, like setting the logistics for that. Flights or hotels, rental cars. So not everybody can visit in person. If you're a student who just won't be able to visit in person, guess what? There's tons of resources online to do virtual visits, both from provided by the schools directly and or outside third party vendors. And if all you have to do is do an internet search for virtual visit name of school X, and just take advantage of those resources. Also, many of you in high school settings have colleges coming by your high school in the fall. Take advantage of those visits. If there's a local college fair, and parents can help kind of keep an eye on this type of stuff, and just be the kind of logistic point person for getting driving your students around, right? So there's definitely ways for parents to be supportive, but again, getting back to what I said at the beginning, really kind of finding that space to help your students grow, because this isn't just about them being able to put themselves front and center to the colleges. It's also about them being successful and having bandwidth and the skill set to be successful once they get to college, right? Because it's not just about the getting in, it's about thriving once you're there, and then the whole rest of your life after that, like just learning how to be an adult. So
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It is, yeah, it's all about communication, right? It's all being, and also like confronting, situations where you need to communicate better with all parties involved. I guess like two more questions before we sign off
Yeah, sounds
is where does Orbit's right fit matcher come in? How does starting from genuine fit change the way a student can build their list?
Yeah, I think the key comes down to just having lots of variables in the kind of mix here, right? If you think of this building a list as making a stew, normally stews, soups have more ingredients than you would think. So it's kind of the idea of let's have more options for my preferences and my kind of my profile, and then really letting the intelligence of our right fit matcher, which has really been engineered with the new AI tools in mind to kind of take all these factors and produce a really smart list. Um, so I think it comes down to just really looking at this as a somewhat complex thing and not just kind of focusing on just a couple factors, right? Multiple factors, and factors that aren't just static, but are really based on like just the most recent information about schools, and using the strength of our new kind of AI tools in order to do that. So it's really about kind of having the diversity of inputs, and being willing to like think through that too, like what is important to me, what do I want. So it comes back to what I said at the beginning. It was really having that list of must have, want to have, don't want to have. So our right fit matcher is built with this in mind.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, it's a heck of a tool. I guess the last question, I'd be remiss if I did not ask it, is if a junior right now is watching this
Hmm.
and they have a totally blank list, what's the very first move you would tell them to make
Yeah,
this week?
just what I said from at the beginning, Dan. It would be sit down and make your list of must haves, want to have, don't want to have. Okay. But then also, and in terms of that, like, why? Not just like what, but why? Like, why is that important to me? So, really kind of thinking about that from an introspective way. Like, what are the things in my life that I get excited about? Right? What are the things maybe that I want more of? Right? That I haven't been exposed to. So these are a lot of the wants, right? And the must have would be thing like, honestly, it must have, and this is okay. It's okay to have things like it must have a D1 football team. I mean, that's fine if you're that type of student, right? But you got to kind of sit down and do this introspection. One of the things I do with my students that I work with individually is have them do a series of self-reflection exercises along these lines. So, and that when you see, if you go look at the right fit matcher in orbit, you'll see that these factors are there. So it would be even before you start filling them out to look at those factors and start kind of making your lists, right? So this really comes down to being thoughtful about it, which is another thing I tell my students, like the way you're the best applicant is by being thoughtful. And let's I know this episode is not about essays, but essays that are kind of have a lot of thought put into them versus they're just kind of whipped out at the end, like are much better essays. So stay tuned for a future episode about essays on this. But yeah, it comes back to just doing this introspection and thinking through the must haves, want to haves, don't want to have. Great. Yeah. Yeah, pleasure too. Yeah, happy to be here, Dan, and happy to have everybody watching. All right. See you next time.